This podcast is part of the No Phony Podcast Network, the home of independent awesomeness.
I immediately regret the question because I had no idea you did that much.
Becoming a name in an industry has become a bit of the issue, really. Ego does get involved. So the fans having something to say will be addressed in the end.
Casey, who do you think the most popular superhero is?
I would have to go with, let me think about this for a second. I would say, are we going Marvel or DC or just in the whole realm of superheroes?
The whole realm of possibilities.
I would go with Superman.
I think you're right. And today's episode, Casey, actually has a fella by the name of Rags Morales, who's one of the many people, I don't know if it's many or several or few, people who have actually drawn a Superman comic. And so Rags is somebody that I know. He actually, it's funny how he and I got to know each other. He was, I'm going to reveal something here, Casey. In my day life, I work as a digital marketer. I know this thing called SEO, and it's basically about rankings and how to get better rankings. And I met Rags through a mutual friend, and Rags said, you know what, I'm trying to rank for my own name because, you know, I am somebody and people want to find me, and this imposter type website is ranking instead. I said, hey, man, I'm happy to help you with that. That's easy. But to pay me, I need you to draw me into a Superman comic. And he said, yeah, I'll do it. So, you know, I did my work and I said, there you go, Rags. You're back where you belong in Google. And he goes, well, here you go, Bill. And he showed me a sketch drawing. He was actually writing he was drawing one of the Superman episodes, and he had a picture of me and he had a picture of my son. And I was like, awesome, man. I was drawn into a comic book. And my son was probably 5 at the time. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to look like a super dad, man. I'm going to look fucking amazing. So I take this comic book up to him. I'm like, look. I open the page and I show him the picture. I'm like, that's you and me. My son goes, huh. So at the end, it was really a gift for me. He just, it didn't strike him the way it struck me. But, you know, I was really thankful to Rags for doing that. So it's cool that he's going to be a guest on our show today.
Well, that was how many years ago?
Probably 8.
8 years ago?
Yeah.
So is your son, is he more interested in it now? Does he think it's cooler now that, you know, as kids get older, they think, you know, like I didn't like a lot of stuff when I was a kid that I'm very interested in now, you know?
Yeah. He's actually he has a affinity for drawing now, and he does acknowledge that he was in a comic book now.
Nice.
But, you know, I don't let the truth get in the way of a funny story. So, yeah, no,
that's awesome, man.
It was a cool sort of thing for me because I've been reading comics my entire life. I'm one of those kind of kids. I'm not a massive collector. Like I wasn't, you know, let me get every single issue of this and store it, you know, kind of like you do with toys, as we learned from another episode. But I've always had comics around. I even look around this house sometimes and there's still comics stashed somewhere. All sorts of comics, DC and Marvel especially.
Well, you're about to find something else out.
Hit me.
When, like, The Walking Dead started, and then after The Walking Dead, there was The Talking Dead, and then real late night show on AMC called Comic Book Man with Kevin Smith.
Sure, yeah.
And so I started collecting comics because I love the art. I love the artwork. It's great. But I don't have time to read all these comics. So my comics are now in storage with my Evel Knievel toys.
Unbelievable. And you never read them?
Never read them. Maybe I read a bunch of the Walking Dead stuff, but that was pretty much it for the comics. I did buy, I think there's a new series out that Rags actually worked on, the New 52.
Yeah,
correct?
well, that's what I'm in. I'm in the Superman.
Yeah, I bought a bunch of those. Or it might have, I'm not sure. It might have actually been the series after that because it was more recent than 8 years ago. So
I've lost interest in comics. I watched the Marvel movies and DC movies. I've moved into that medium. But I think I lost interest because of things like, and we can ask Rags about it, things like the New 52, right? Why did they decide, hey, we need to go ahead and relaunch the entire DC universe again? They've done it with Marvel. They create, like, Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. There's like 2,000 versions of Spider-Man. Okay, there's no reason. I'm happy with just my regular Spider-Man, the one I kind of grew up with. Sure, show me some new stories, but then it gets complicated in the comic book sort of story arc spectrum, whatever. You know, it's just, there's so much going on in those comics. It is a full-time sort of, to me anyway, job of trying to keep up with all of it, and I just got lost.
Yeah, it's the same with the movies too. I mean, there's so many different reboots and everything, and like, which world is this, or is that connected to this? You know, it's just it's very hard to follow.
Luckily, I got in on the beginning, so it's not so hard. But for sure, I mean, if you're coming into anything halfway through, you're like, "The fuck is going on? Why is the world blowing up here?"
Yeah. What I found pretty interesting about the comic book world is I really like, since I like the art so much of it, I found out about like the variant issues, like the different covers that you could get for like the number ones, and you know what I'm talking about? Like
the
different
first issue, you can get a variant cover. So
yeah, like it's different than the one that everybody gets. They only make like a certain amount of these variant covers that they call them.
Intentionally making collectibles.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I always thought that was cool.
I know that comics for a while had a hard time. I mean, they maybe weren't selling quite like they used to. And if I got the story right, that's why Marvel ended up selling a lot of their characters to other production companies. So for a long time, other people other than Marvel, I think you had to have the Marvel logo. I'm sure there was something in the deal that you still had to show the registered trademark, but it wasn't actually owned by Marvel. So they had to sell the rights to we talked about the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
So that's the story. So they were kind of out of money, so they had to sell these things off. But I don't know what the comic business is like now. Do people go and buy them, or do people just download them?
Yeah, I don't know. It's got to be definitely different with all the technology and stuff out there now. You can read everything digitally. Same with regular books. I mean, they have the Kindle. They have like a Kindle version for comic books, like DC, Marvel, all the major comic book places have their own apps that you can just read the comics right on the app with a subscription.
Sort of takes the old charm of collecting comic books sort of out of the equation, and maybe that is old school and it's dead and it ain't coming back. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Vinyl came back.
Rags will know. Rags Morales will know.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to him.
Hey, Rags, how you doing, old friend?
Good. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing pretty good. I haven't seen you in a few years. We still.
How's your son?
Yeah, I was just telling the story in the intro about your drawing of him. Yeah. He's 16 now. He's showing a real interest in drawing, and he's actually like, "Hey, maybe I can get lessons from Rags." Like, I don't know if Rags gives drawing lessons.
Sure. How much money are you making, Bill?
You mean how much money is he making?
Well, he's 16. I'm not expecting much.
No, he's if he could make money laying in bed, he'd be a millionaire.
Yeah, right. Wouldn't we all?
Well, in the intro, we talked a little about you and some of your experience, but to kick off, I don't even know how many different comic characters you have drawn. I know a handful, but I'm sure there's more that you've done that I'm aware of. So maybe you can rattle off a few.
Well, by title
or by character.
Well, if I go by character, the first book I did was a team book. But if you want to go by character, then I guess with this Prime Agravar, and High Silvar, Fox Hardluck, Ishi Bersum, Dwalamar Omen, Minder. And that's just the starting cast. It doesn't include all the villains. From there, I went to Black Condor. From there, I skipped over to Valiant, and I did Archer and Armstrong. The first just one issue. Most of my time there was spent during Turok. A little bit of Geomancer, some Eternal Warriors, Shadow Man, Sliders. I did the TV show comic, a couple of those. Then I came back to DC and was working on Our Man. That turned into a little bit of JSA work. Hawkman, that turned into Identity Crisis. That turned to Wonder Woman, and also Superman, Batman, a little Batman Confidential. Then I guess the action run on 52. I did an issue of Sinestro. Then I did a Convergence storyline where I did some Green Arrow stuff.
I immediately regret this question because I had no idea you did that much.
Yeah.
Wow, then
Then I went to Marvel, did some Point One work, a little New Avengers, bunch of covers. Then from there, I did Amory Wars with Claudio Sanchez of Coheed and Cambria. That's an independent book. He's a lead singer and guitarist of that band. And then just did a little bit of Bloodshot work, and that's where I am now. So I'm just kind of semi-retirement because I'm not really exclusive. I have no contract. Just doing some traveling when there's traveling to be done, and commission work, and trying to get some independent work with some other artists and writers. Nothing I want to talk about because nothing's set in stone. But if I have something to say, I'll be announcing it. 31 years. It's a lot of work.
That's wow. I didn't know. Wow, 31 years. What's the business like? I mean, having so many different bosses? You technically had different bosses, so it must be like every comic has different rules and different sort of.
No, the only rules really, if you're handling a title that's been done before, like if I did Action Comics or Wonder Woman or anything like Batman, they come with templates. You know, there's a whole slew of people that have handled it before. And there's parameters within that slew. So you've got something that's esque to somebody else, like Neil Adams-esque, or Garcia Lopez-esque, where you try to get something that's comfortable. But whenever you're doing something because you are doing something for the first time, or they're handing something to you that they want your touch on it, it's more like you want to do. It's like I tell people. I tell everybody. It's you got to do something familiar and new at the same time. So you have to be within a specific template while you're adding another layer to it. And then occasionally you run into a character like Hawkman that I did that becomes synonymous with you. And I guess in this field, that's something that you want. You want to be able to have that character that they say that character and your name pops up with it. So
yeah. Do you get any say in story, or is it typically here's the script and draw around this?
Typically, it's this is where we're going with it. When I used to teach at the Cuba School, and I taught story adaptation. And one of the 5 tenets I gave them was absolute understanding of your role as an artist when you're dealing with a story. A lot of writers have ambitions that are along the lines of wanting to direct, and they have a tendency to try to tell you too much of how to draw something. And I told them it's fine. They can tell you what to draw. They don't tell you how to draw it. That's where you draw the line. And with that regard, you have to consider them as screenwriters and you're the director. So whenever you get a script, if you're lucky, you'll run into somebody like Greg Rucka, who openly admits he can't draw and he can't conceive of it in a way that's translatable. So he lets you do it. When I worked with Dwayne McDuffie, I did a little JLA work with Dwayne McDuffie. It's a couple of issues, and he was vague. He wouldn't, he would say something like, on Green Lantern. And okay, that's a headshot. How close you want to get with the camera is up to you. Whereas another writer might say extremely, extreme up, upshot, extreme close up, that kind of a thing. They have a specific thing. That's where they start, dictating too much. One thing I don't like are writers that treat you like an extension of their brilliance, and that you're just a tool that they don't have, but they use you as a tool as if they did have it. Mm. So it's a collaborative effort. You have to be able to give a little, get a little. And if I have a question, or if I have something that some reason doesn't work well with the script, I'll call the writer and say, listen, I have a better idea. How about we try this? And more often than not, I've been lucky. They've been pretty receptive to it. So, it's basically a give and take, and if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to be hard. I mean, again, it took me many years to get to that level to where I was able to have a bit more say with the script, but like Shakespeare said, the play is the thing. And if you don't adhere to the story, and if you're not doing anything specific for the story, then you're pulling away too much. Two things that were said to me that were really cool. Pete Tomasi said, as long as you keep the spirit of the story alive, feel free to have a little interpretation. And Paul Levitz, I called him once with, questions and suggestions and ideas, and he just says, listen, Rags, it's a script, it's not a contract. So that's really the basic, your pacing could be different, your camera angles for sure is different, but basically you draw to the dialogue, you draw to the requirements of the story, and you try to add a sense of drama to it if you can, where it's necessary.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. You got to have crazy deadlines. I'm sure the deadlines must be, I'm sure you're used to them, but they must be kind of a pain in the ass if you got maybe a writer or other people that you can't collaborate with.
Well, generally speaking, if you're penciling a book, you're fine if you can average about 5 pages a week. So a page a day, Monday through Friday. Let's say it's a long day. It's you talk about 14 hours a day. When you consider referencing thumbnails, just the act of drawing itself is the act of just death by 1,000 cuts. Because it's about trying this and that doesn't work out and it's starting over, and it could be a long day, especially for someone like me who considers myself more an artist than I am a comic book artist. I don't fall along the lines of common tropes. I don't think I do. I think when I draw very differently than a lot of people. And I'm not trying to be like somebody else. I'm not trying to hearken anybody. I have my influences, and many of them are comic book people, but I'm not going out of my way to be Kirby-esque or, to be like Michael Golden or Neil Adams or anybody. I just try to draw to the best of my ability, and wherever that takes me, it's where I go.
What are some of the characteristics that you think, are you?
Specifically, my strengths would probably be, I grew up being a huge fan of the American illustrators, James Montgomery Flagg or Dean Cornwell, J.C. Leyendecker, Norman Rockwell. So, with those artists, they have a single image that they try to sell. So you try to capture an entire story in a single image. So for me, I think my strengths would be along the lines of probably giving some humanity to something. I think in terms of emotional content. I think in terms of who that character is and who the relationship and what are the relationships to him with the people within the room. I try to bring a sense of humanity. I think that's one of the reasons why Identity Crisis worked well with me, is because it was such an honest story and very, it was very character driven, not incident driven. I couldn't draw a Michael Bay comic book, It would have to be something that's more in tune with the human condition, really, is the way I relate to it,
When you're hired to do a comic book, are you penciling everything in that entire book, or is it a collaboration with other artists?
Oh, do I have assistants? No, it's all me. The only assistance I would have if I was working with an inker or if I wasn't just the colorist. There's a certain amount of shorthand. There's a certain amount of harmony that has to be established when you're working with other people. So when you're working with an inker, sometimes it takes a little while to figure each other out, so that you can anticipate the way that they're going to be handling their end of it. And then occasionally you're lucky you run into a really good artist who can draw very well. See, there's the stigma with inkers that they're line followers, and over the course of years, it became a specialty thing. Back in the old days, they were so deadline heavy in terms of getting out as much product as possible. There was not a lot of time for polish. So you would give someone the job to pencil, but he didn't have time to finish it. So he would hand it off to an inker. And the inker had to be a very good artist, and those old time inkers were more what we would call embellishers. Today, there are a lot of inkers because there's, on one part, the name, becoming a name in an industry has become a bit of the issue, really. Ego does get involved, and there's a lot of inkers that are just cognizant not, stepping on the artist's toes so they don't do more, So it's rare to find, but honestly, it's impossible because it depends on the tool that you're working, with which you're working, because every tool has a different look. So if you're working with an inker, and pencilers have gotten so heavy, so line heavy, so dictatorial, that one, it makes it easy for an inker because everything is there, but at the same time, it also kind of limits their input. So when I did an issue of Turok back in the 90s with Gonzalo Mayo. Now, Gonzalo Mayo is one of those old-time Filipino artists. And with him, and I was warned, I says, he's going to go gonzo. We called it going gonzo because of Gonzalo. We called it gonzo. He'll just take it over. I says, well, that's perfect. So I did it very linearly. I didn't drop blacks or shadows. I just drew what was the characters. And he absolutely loved it. He had freedom to do whatever the hell he wanted to do with it. And because of that, I thought it was probably one of the top 5 jobs I've ever done in my entire career, because I gave him. And there was one particular panel where I did a little more just to see what would happen. It looked like shit. So, it's a give and take. It's a partnership. It's an underrated field, really, inking. It's because a lot of people just have that stereotype that they're just line followers, and to some degree, it's only because of the ego of the penciler that makes it that way.
So how does technology actually help at all? You were talking about I like Gonzo, but I always think about the inker until you've proven me wrong. The inker is just sort of like, okay, I'm going to do the cleanup work after the artist, and I'm thinking in my head, being naive. We have Illustrator, we have Adobe Photoshop, like some of those tools. I know that they can trace pretty well. So you're never leaning on any one of those type of tools. You're still doing it pretty traditionally.
I'm 100% traditional. I pencil and ink on paper. I'm too old. This will give people an idea of where someone who's in their 50s is when it comes to this kind of technology. I graduated in 1985, and in 1986 was the first required computer course in my high school. So that I just missed it by a year. I missed the cutoff where I would have been introduced to computer class for the first time. And when I went to the art school, and I went to, it was all traditional stuff. Nothing was done on computer. It wasn't a requirement. But then when I became a teacher a couple of years ago, it was a requirement to have a MacBook because of the programs, because of Photoshop and Illustrator, and you have to know this kind of stuff now. So for me, I can't tell, and the only thing that has changed for me is that I don't have to worry about using overnight mail. I scan things in now. I know that much about a computer. I can scan it in, and I can make my files, and I can go ahead and send it to whatever Dropbox or whatever system they're using. But that's about it. So as far as technology goes, I'm the last of the dinosaurs, I guess. That's my generation.
So you can really work anywhere. You could work remotely. It sounds like, you have Dropbox, or before, mailing things in. You never really had to go to an office, or did you?
No. For 31 years, I've always worked at home. It's as the technology advanced, people became more spread out. And back in the old days, you would have to be in the city that the publisher was in, and you would have to be able to, at the very least, drive in the pages. I know back in the 60s and the 70s, you would have to be within driving distance to drive in the pages, and that's the way they used to do it. In the 40s, it was in-house. The last company to do it in-house was CrossGen, and they were in Florida back in the 90s. But that was an anomaly, to what's really going on. So you would have to be close enough to drive it in, and then when Overnight Express or FedEx came, you would have to have it. You would change your work to be handed in within 1 to 3 days, and now you could just scan it in. But the faster you can get it in, the further apart the talent became. So now we're all over the world. The only thing that changes is a time zone, And that's what I used to tell my students. I says, listen, I used to only have to compete with a certain small group that slowly got larger as the generations. Now you're competing artistically across the world. So it's a lot harder now to make yourself valuable to a publisher. But if you know a lot about the technology, if you know how to ink on computer, if you could do everything on computer with Photoshop or Illustrator, whatever it is, whatever tools they're using now, if you have your Cintiq tablet or whatever, and you can work that way, because publishers, certainly you have to be artistic enough to do a good job, but really a publisher only really cares about is just getting out a product on their schedule. And that's the most important part. It's always been that way, but the most important part is to get on time. And there's only so many jobs available, so you have to be able to break into somebody's talent pool, the group of pencilers and writers and inkers and letterers and colorists that any specific editor is comfortable and has given work to before and understands them. And there's a biorhythm between the two, and they understand what to expect, because it's about being predictable. The more predictable you are, stability is predictability, or just being generally productive and understanding that, they don't want to walk into a Wednesday meeting and have their book that's hot. A book that's hot isn't a good thing. That means it's on fire and it needs help.
How much has the business changed with the internet? Does it allow more opportunities for artists and storytellers, or is it maybe eating away at the core business? Is it a pro or con at the end of the day?
I can't speak for retailers. I do know that there was a time not too long ago, I remember hearing, back when I was still with DC was reaching out to retailers about web comics and things like that. I don't know how that worked, to be honest, but I know that there was a major concern with the internet being so omnipotent. Really, it's so big. It's just a sign of the change. It's honestly, it's just right now. It's the friction of changing from one thing to the next. It'll figure itself out. I think a lot of people are still traditionalists and still like their hard copies. And then there's on the same note, there are people that are just so glad that they can finally take that room and reduce the amount of long boxes that are in there. So that has something to do with it as well. But but those books are only as good as your light bill, or your ability to pay your internet bill. It's kind of like music. Everybody's music is in their phones now. I would have to spend an awful lot of money to retrieve a lot of the stuff I'm listening to now to get it in CDs. So we've become very, very reliant on fiber optics for sure.
Yeah.
But as a business, from my personal point of view, it's opened up an audience for me that it's much more accessible. I would draw something and it would finally come out, and I would bug my editor, hey, what are they saying? Do you like it? Are we doing good? Is this going to be a hit? Now I could just look at it on the internet and see what the response is without having to bother them. And so there's that aspect of it. The ability to have ancillary revenue streams has been opened up, with the internet. I don't do it this way, but I know that there are artists out there that send files. You pay them to send you a file so that they can have the artwork in file. So it's some thumb drive somewhere, and that to me is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Because then the availability of making copies is very easy for them. Who knows who's making money on the side that way. Trying to retrieve their commissions cost. And because of that, I've had to be savvy about I've had people that have hired me to do a job and then didn't pay me, but then got a nice JPEG of it. And, granted it's only 50 DPI, but they got 50 DPI for free. So I've had to be very, very cautious of it. And then I've had to structure that aspect of my commission work to guarantee some form of income, And now I don't start anything unless I get a down payment. And they don't get a good copy until they finish paying it off. Once it's done, I take a picture of it that it's at an angle and it's not signed. And I says, well, as soon as the transition's done, I'll send you a copy, then I'll post it on the internet, and I'll mail you the original.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense. Photographers work that way too. They
yeah,
give the screen resolution, but they won't give the print until the payment is made.
Yeah, there are people out there that are just dishonest. I mean, they're the minority, thankfully. Of all the commissions of the couple hundred of commissions that I've ever done, I guess I could only name maybe 3 people that I would work again for. And I do have that list. I do. And so, because there are people out there that are just out and out scumbags. I did New York City Comic Con many years ago where a guy was trading DVD movies for artwork. So I says, all right, well, I forgot what movie. I think it was an Adrian Brody movie that I was going to do. And so I did the sketch. I handed him the sketch. He handed me the DVD. I opened it up and it was empty.
Wow. Yeah. Terrible.
So yeah, that kind of thing happens.
Yeah.
And then they're put up on eBay, and then they're gone. Once they're gone, they're gone. So
yeah.
Hopefully I'll run into him again.
Yeah. Don't forget what he looks like. He's probably at the same place you left him.
Squirrely little guy, stringy hair.
What do you think about the quality of comics today? We were saying at the top of the show, I mean, there was a point where, as a casual fan, and maybe a little more than casual, there were so many storylines that I eventually wasn't able to keep up. Obviously, millions of people can keep up better than I can. I like just, take some traditional storylines and sort of just keep on taking that, take the character and just kind of keep on letting that character grow. I just got a little confused. I couldn't keep up with all the different Spider-Man, and I couldn't keep up with even, the new 52 that you did. They rebooted the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, is this a cash grab or is this like a real artistic vision?
It didn't come from me.
Yeah.
Again, a publisher's job is to get a thing out. They're like record producers. They're like everybody. They're just a house of moneymakers. And back when Paul Levitz was the publisher for DC, all he had to do was show them that he was making 15% increase in sales. As long as it, kept slowly going up, we were fine. Now that there are these movie houses now that own comic books, for a Time Warner, which was always DC's parent company, things became DC Entertainment because they were going straight to their movie section. They just recently sold to AT&T. Marvel is owned by Disney, so there's always the option of movies that way and cartoons. So it's the skeptic in me is saying they're just throwing a lot of mud on the wall so that they can have that one franchise, that one storyline that they can milk it forever in various forms. Then there's also the internet as well, because things are less overhead in terms of printing costs and shipping costs of getting things to comic book shops. There's the opportunity to make more money. And politically speaking, this is just the residue of what happened with Reaganism and Reaganomics and the libertarian movement. And we're now suffering for it, where it's like, okay, there's one ship leaving a port. Who's going to be a billionaire and get on that ship? Who's going to be left behind on the dock? And that's just the way the world is being run now. And every business is that way, and comics have been no exception, especially since the advent of computer graphics has made the fantasy that much more valuable. Things don't look silly anymore. They've been able to do more interesting things with it because of computer graphics. So I can't say specifically why they do it, but I do know this: they're not creative enough to do it, but they do it anyway. What that means, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
There are some publishers that do try to. I think DC is actually in good shape now because they got Jim Lee.
Because they have who?
Jim Lee. Jim Lee is the publisher now at DC. Dan DiDio is no longer with them. So, having been an artist, a creative artist, his own publisher, I think DC has a better chance of putting out better product in that regard, in terms of having someone at the top having a better idea of what to do. So I don't know what his job is. I don't know what the communication is between he and AT&T. Maybe it's better that he's worked with AT&T because there's no history of working with Time Warner that he has to deal with.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of things going on that I couldn't fathom, and I could only guess and speculate. And that's basically it.
It seems to me that they've made at least some storyline change, character changes. It seems to be that they've at least been trying to be a little bit more inclusive. Would you agree with that? Or,
well, listen, don't I don't want any fan who would be listening in on this that would think that they're being left behind. That's not the case. It's never been the case. Fans, and speaking about the internet and the accessibility of the internet, their voice has gotten loud as well. And, you know, in the end, you do have to please the fan. You can't just, you know, turn Batman into a gun-toting, you know, whatever, and expect the fan base to respect and honor that. You know, there are certain changes that are just not worth it. If you do that, it still has to be an Elseworld. You know, when I did First Wave with Brian Azzarello, again, Batman had guns. It wasn't part of the continuity. It was just an Elseworld kind of a thing where he ran into Doc Savage and the Spirit and the Avenger and Blackhawks and Rima, you know, the jungle. We had all kinds of crazy things going on in there. So the fans having something to say will be addressed. In the end, you can't go too far. You can try things that are new, and hopefully they like it. I mean, when we did 52, it was well received. At least Action was. You know, they really liked what Ryan and I had done because we brought it back to basics, and that was a good thing. You know, again, familiar and new at the same time.
Yeah.
So Rags, I think you said that you've been penciling professionally for 31 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is this something that you always wanted to do since you were a kid? Were you into comics as a kid?
Keith Giffen has a great line that I've said millions of times. He says, we lose our audience when they lose their virginity. And I was no different. So when I was a teenager and I finally, you know, blossomed into adulthood in that regard, comic books became less important to me. It was my first love as far as just a form of entertainment. You know, back in the 70s, we didn't have internet. We didn't have the cable. You know, we had Saturday morning cartoons and that was it. There was no Cartoon Network, and we had, you know, Fox News wasn't even around yet. You know, we had 13 channels, and one of them was UHF. So we didn't have a lot of options. So comic books were like video games to us, you know, and for a quarter you can get one. So I would pedal my banana seat bicycle down to the 7-Eleven with $1 and come back with 4 new books, and I would spend a lot of time drawing and absorbing it and reading the stories and getting to know the characters. So I guess that's a common story. But when I was also a Boy Scout when I was younger too. So Boys Life magazine, which was the magazine for the Boy Scouts, always had Norman Rockwell covers on it from Saturday Evening Post, you know, something to do with scouting. And of course he did work specifically just for Boys Life for a time. So we always got these wonderful, you know, covers that, you know, for a time I thought I'd be a painter, an illustrator. And then when I lost my virginity, I started getting very much into, you know, Charles Dana Gibson and you know, old, you know, artists from the 1800s, some of the Impressionists as well, you know, like Manet and Toulouse-Lautrec and Delacroix. I would get into a whole lot of different stuff. But when it came to looking at my life and looking at my career, not a whole lot of work for illustrators. And I hadn't really developed my painting skills yet that well to where I can compete in that realm. So I thought, well, you know, comic books are still alive and kicking, and they're still doing it. So, and there's a school that's right like 15 minutes away from where I live, where I can go, and it all just seemed to line up just perfectly for me. So, and I adore comic books. I don't think I'm very good at them, but I adore the idea of comic books. But I think in my heart of hearts, I would rather do paintings,
Why don't you think you're good at them? I'm sure everybody, is always telling you that you don't believe them.
Well, yeah. People tell me I'm good, and I don't believe that. I don't think I'm good at them because I don't think I follow the old tropes. Again, I'm not esque enough. And when I draw something, I draw that with my unique vision, and I don't draw faces to be cookie cutter like everyone else. I don't have that comfort zone. There are certain artists that draw similarly to other people. You could see two different influences at once, and they do it brilliantly, and they're wonderful artists. But, I delve too much into characterization, and I delve too much in body language and humanity and staging and lighting and things that are just not common to comic books, at least the way they evolved. I mean, back in the old days, staging and lighting was always very important. But, from the 70s on, not a lot of people, since Jack Kirby, really, not a lot of people, lit their scenes that well. It was always the same light source, it was the shadow of the nose always fell the same way regardless. And then occasionally they would do, something at night. They would have to draw that. But to me, I'm just trying to make an illustration every panel. And because of that, I don't adhere to the old rules. And because of that, I think I've left a lot of the fan base behind because of that, Some people appreciate the way I do things. Some people just flat out don't. And I've heard it from both ends. I'm either overrated or underrated, depends on who you're asking.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, your answer earlier was awesome when I asked about, what makes your style you. And I was expecting, well, I draw with sharper edges, or my faces are a little longer. They look, and you said, no, it's really about the way that I make the stage. And it's very much like a director of photography in movies. I think that was the most amazing answer. I was totally not expecting that. That's a thing. I mean, that's a really important part of the whole image.
Yeah. Yeah. In the end, it's the whole backbone, really, and there's a lot of people that honestly I don't think that's such an odd answer, because I would think everybody who's artistic, because it's you can listen to a musician go on and on about a song that they love, and it doesn't sound like pop music to me, so it falls deaf on my ears. But for them, they understand the product well enough, and they understand what the artist is trying to do and the intent of it, and the adherence of that. Milo Manara not long ago had a big thing going on because he made, what's a Spider-Man? I think it was a Spider-Woman, and he had her squatting in a very provocative pose, and it was a whole to-do about it, to the point where Marvel had to kill the cover, which was like. But as an artist, I was looking at it as, wow, that was really brilliantly done, and it fit the character, But because he's known for his pornography, his Italian pornography, right off the bat, people couldn't get that out of their head because it wasn't pop music enough for them. It wasn't sanitized enough for them. It was too artistic for them.
Sure, right.
And so that answer is the kind of answer I guess you would get from an artist.
Well, Rags, we are just about out of time. You're super accomplished. Just thrilled that you joined us here. I got one last question for you, and it's you were talking about, when I look back at my career, the life of my career. So I'm going to tag on to that. When you look back, what would you say was the most enjoyable, maybe the highlight of your career, and what is maybe the lowest part of your career?
Well, I don't think I've hit the highlight of my career. I've had fiscally rewarding years. I think looking back at my Turok work, I might have been not knowing it at the time. It was probably my most rewarding artistically, probably because, Native Americans and the culture has always been something that's been with me my entire life. I do have it in my bloodlines. So, it would make sense that when I watched Lone Ranger, Tonto was more interesting to me than the Lone Ranger. So I guess maybe Turok may have been something that I kind of look back on and said, I would love to do that again. the lowest point, probably realizing that everybody loves a success story, but nobody loves success. And the lowest point was probably post-identity crisis, where, you know, here I am supposed to be enjoying my work, and people are taking shots at me, you know, because again, you know, nobody likes success. So, you know, trying to reward myself for the years spent trying to become something, and realizing that the reward was still hard to get, you know, and thinking that I had done something that was significant that not everybody really appreciated, you know. So,
Yeah.
but then again, you can't please everybody, so who am I to complain? You know, it was a good series, rewarding, and it made the 15 years it took for me to get there. Well, so, you know, I can't really complain that much, but you know, I have a lot of ideas, and hopefully one of these days I'll be able to get them off the ground. You know?
Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate all your work, and we love your artwork. And
Thank you.
So before we close this, why don't you tell everyone where they can find some of your original artwork? That you have a website, Instagram,
Oh yeah,
Twitter, all that good stuff.
yeah. I've got. I do a lot of my communication through Facebook. Eventually, I'm going to, believe it or not, I'm going to disappear. I have a fantasy, and I don't know how viable it'll be, but I do want to eventually be pulled off most of the grid, and there's going to be one place you can find me eventually. But for now, there's a Rags Morales art page on Facebook for the old people. For the new kids, I'm on Instagram, even though that's now part of Facebook. But yeah, Rags Morales art page. And there's two Rags Morales. Make sure you get the one with my face. And it says art page. That's where I do most of my communication. Again, Instagram, Rags and hashtags. Again, there's two of those, but Rags and hashtags is my business one. My main website is ragsagainstthemachine.net. Also ragsmorales.com. I think you can still get that. And that's a Tumblr. That's probably the one where I'm going to consolidate everything to there. Hopefully, eventually, I'll get away from that as well and just get my own website instead of just working with another house. And there's at Rags Morales at Twitter, and official Rags Morales on Comic Art Fans. So I'm a little bit everywhere.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be on the big wide web. So
yeah, like I say, it's blossomed to where you're very vocal and very visible. Yeah, so that's the internet.
well, thanks again. This has been great. Hope you enjoyed it as well.
Right on, fellas. Yeah, it was good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Rags.
Take
Right
care.
on.
Bye bye.
See you.